appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route. There's numerous people running up the hill.
On the 22nd of November 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas, Texas.
The policeman says, no, you cannot come in here. You cannot come in here.
For 50 years, the truth behind the tragic events has been veiled by secrecy, conspiracy theories, and classified government records. Now, two experts have re-examined the evidence, and their conclusions are startling. Could Kennedy's secret killer have been hiding in plain sight all along? The basic facts of the most famous assassination in history are simple.
The usual welcoming committee presents Mrs. Kennedy with a bouquet of red roses.
It's a routine visit to Dallas on the presidential campaign trail. The sun is shining, the people are welcoming, and the top of the presidential limo is down.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark.
At 12:30 p.m., shots are fired. President John F. Kennedy is mortally wounded, and Texas Governor John Connally is seriously injured.
It was definitely the president's car. We can see the First Lady's pink suit. That's the only identification we could.
Both men are rushed to nearby Parkland Hospital. Half an hour later, President Kennedy is pronounced dead.
The President of the United States is dead.
Kennedy's suspected killer, Lee Harvey Oswald, 45 minutes after the assassination, murders a police officer. He's then arrested in a Dallas movie theater. Then President Kennedy's body is flown to Washington for the autopsy. 2 days later, Dallas club owner Jack Ruby shoots and kills Kennedy murder suspect Oswald.
He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
The next day, President Kennedy is buried at Arlington Cemetery. That's where the accepted facts of the Kennedy assassination end, and the mystery of what actually happened begins. Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren is appointed by new President Lyndon Johnson to investigate widespread suspicion that Lee Harvey Oswald was part of a greater criminal plot.
Oswald's Carcano rifle?
Over the next 10 months, in closed court sessions, 552 witnesses give testimony to the Warren Commission, resulting in an 888-page report released to the public. Yet, 50 years later, President Kennedy's murder is still shrouded in suspicion, mystery, and conspiracy theories. How can a crime that is witnessed by hundreds of people, filmed by at least 30, watched by millions on TV, and repeatedly investigated, remain the subject of such speculation? Veteran detective Colin McLaren spent 18 years in the Australian police force, investigating the country's most baffling crimes. He makes a surprising discovery when he turns his formidable skills on the JFK case.
I learned that no other career detective had ever undertaken a cold case study, a forensic analysis of all of the evidence, all of the testimony, and I wanted to be the first. One thing I had to do is I had to see the crime scene. Once I got there, I looked up at the 6th floor of the book depository. I had great trouble understanding why 24 Secret Service agents hadn't seen a man with a gun. Oswald's perch was much smaller, much tighter than I ever imagined from all of the photographs I studied. The thing that struck me most about this case, that even after 50 years, with the majority of the American people rejecting the Warren Commission findings, it's those findings that stand today.
McLaren knows he's not the first person to seriously question the Warren Commission's findings. In 1967, American news network CBS put these findings to the test.
CBS News had a tower and target track constructed to match exactly the heights and distances in Dealey Plaza. The target, a standard FBI silhouette, moved by electric motor at 11 miles an hour. approximately the speed of the presidential limousine. 11 volunteer marksmen took turns, firing clips of 3 bullets each at the moving target.
The CBS special asks, is it physically possible to fire 3 rounds in 5.6 seconds or less, using the antiquated Mannlicher Carcano bolt-action rifle Lee Harvey Oswald had used?
It is a clumsy weapon to bring to that sort of a fight. Lee Harvey Oswald, let's be honest, he had a bit of junk.
A weapons engineer had the best score. 3 hits in 5.2 seconds.
So CBS concludes that it is plausible to fire the 3 shots on target in less than 5.6 seconds.
Here we have an outstanding ballistics man who did that controlled test. However, it was his 3rd attempt. So he had a few rehearsals. Lee Harvey Oswald, he was on the fly. He had his gun out and he was pointing it and he was shooting. He had no rehearsals and he was riddled with obviously adrenaline and pressure, nerves and probably fear. So I can't accept that he could get 3 away in that amount of time at all.
Neither could Howard Donahue. Not only was he the best marksman, he was also a ballistics expert. His test on CBS News launches him into a personal investigation that would eventually reveal who really killed JFK. In 1967, a popular men's magazine asks Howard Donahue, a weapons engineer, to write an article backing the Warren Commission's conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald is the lone gunman responsible for killing JFK. First, Donahue looks at ballistics. The Warren Commission concluded that Oswald fired 3 shots. His first shot passed through Kennedy's neck, wounding him and Texas Governor John Connally. Oswald's second shot missed entirely, and his third shot hit JFK in the head and killed him. Donahue decides to examine each of the 3 shots. What the commission said was Oswald's first shot is probably the most contentious. The commission found that the bullet struck President Kennedy at the base of his neck, just to the right of his spine, exited his throat below the Adam's apple, struck Governor Connally beneath and behind his right armpit, shattered 4 inches of Connally's 5th rib, exited below his right nipple, and crashed through his right wrist, before finally lodging 2 inches deep in Connally's left thigh. For many critics of the Warren Commission, the position of the 2 men in the presidential limousine rules out the single bullet theory. The critics find it preposterous that a bullet slanting down from the right rear of the president could pierce his throat, make a sharp right turn, enter the extreme right side of Connally's back. But Donahue discovers that Connally and his wife are riding in jump seats. The jump seats were close to the center of the car and lower than the bench seats the Kennedys rode in, which means that Governor Connally was sitting lower down and further inboard than it appeared. Donahue places Connally where he was actually sitting, with his body turned. Now, the bullet's trajectory lines up perfectly. He proves that the Warren Commission's often ridiculed single bullet theory is in fact correct. Critics of the Warren Commission also argue that the bullet is too pristine to have ripped through 2 men. But to his trained eye, the bullet was in fact deformed. This contention that the bullet was perfect was a fallacy. This is further proof to Donahue that the Warren Commission's single bullet theory was correct. But does the bullet match Oswald's rifle?
Mr. Frazier.
Firearms expert FBI agent Robert Frazier answers that question before the Warren Commission.
Following assassination. Are you familiar with this exhibit?
Yes, sir. This is a bullet which was delivered to me in the FBI laboratory on November 22nd.
And did you examine this exhibit to determine whether it had been fired in Exhibit 139, Lee Harvey Oswald's Carcano rifle?
Yes, sir.
And what was your conclusion?
It was. Exhibit 399 was fired from the rifle 139.
The FBI tests showed that the marks on the bullet matched the chamber of Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle. That's equivalent to fingerprints.
Donahue agrees that the single bullet struck the president and Connally, but he wonders if that was actually the first of the 3 shots, as the commission stated. Even the surviving victim, Governor Connally, disagrees with the Commission's findings.
I am convinced beyond any doubt that I was not struck by the first bullet. I know that I heard the first shot, that I turned to my right to see what was happening. Seeing nothing, I was in the process of turning to my left, and I was struck by a second shot. The third shot struck the President, but did not strike me. Now, as I said earlier, this testimony was presented to the Warren Commission. They chose to disagree with my interpretation and my memory of what had occurred.
Donahue discovers that senior Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman's testimony also contradicts the Commission's order of shots. Kellerman was riding in the front seat of the presidential limousine.
That's right, sir.
He describes what he heard after the first shot.
There was a report like a firecracker, pop. And as I turned my head to the right to view whatever it was or see whatever it was, I heard a voice from the back seat, and I firmly believe it was the President's. My God, I'm hit.
Donahue wondered how President Kennedy could say this if that first shot had cut through his throat and windpipe, the way the Commission said it did.
Why did the Warren Commission say that the first shot hit JFK in the back of the neck? There is ample corroborative evidence from many witnesses that saw the first shot hit the pavement and ricochet off.
Virgie Rashley was a bookkeeper at the book depository. In her Warren Commission statement, she says she saw a bullet bouncing off the roadway.
I saw a shot or something hit the pavement.
What did it look like when you saw it?
Well, as I said, I thought it was a firecracker. It looked just like you could see the sparks from it.
Is it possible that a fragment from this ricocheting bullet struck Kennedy, causing him to exclaim, "My God, I'm hit," before he was shot through the neck by the second bullet? Donahue thinks so, and is now convinced that the Warren Commission got the order of the first two shots wrong. Next, he turns his attention to the bullet that delivered JFK a fatal headshot. Dr. James Humes is the pathologist in charge at the Bethesda Naval Hospital. He conducts the President's autopsy just a few hours after his assassination. When Humes testifies before the Warren Commission, he's asked to describe the damage the third shot inflicted.
The third obvious wound at the time of the examination was a huge defect over the right side of the skull. This defect involved both the scalp and the underlying skull, and the brain substance protruding.
According to Humes' testimony, the wound extended 10 to 12 centimeters back to front, from just behind the President's ear to just above his hairline. This enormous wound is a total mystery. One bullet pierces the bodies of two men and emerges in one piece. Yet the bullet that hit Kennedy in the head explodes in a hail of lead. Why did these bullets perform so differently?
This is not the work of a 4-metal jacket bullet. This is more the work of a frangible bullet that is designed to explode violently upon impact.
Colin McLaren wants to see the difference in bullet performance, starting with the full metal jacket bullet that Oswald used in his Kakano rifle.
This is a 4-metal jacket round. It's a Kakano 6.5mm round. It's designed for warfare. It's designed to travel.
Ready to fire. Firing. Colin, I think we're seeing a typical full metal jacket drive-through. Drills a hole, clean as a whistle.
This is a .223 frangible hollow point round. It's designed to explode upon impact, and the results are devastating.
Range is going hot. Ears and eyes. Ready to fire.
As a ballistics expert, Donahue knew that you did not get one shot going straight through and one shot that explodes from the same gun and the same ammunition. According to the autopsy report, the entrance wound's diameter is 6mm, and the bullet tunnels for 15mm before fragmenting. Donahue drills a hole, exactly the same size as the entrance wound recorded at the autopsy. If the shot had come from Oswald's Carcano rifle, the entrance wound in JFK's skull would have to be at least the diameter of the bullet, or bigger. But the entrance wound is only 6 millimeters in diameter. Therefore, it's simply impossible for a 6.5 millimeter Carcano bullet to have impacted JFK's skull. But if the third shot could not have come from Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle, why were 3 shell casings found at his sniper perch?
The advocates of the lone gunman theory will always mention the 3 spent casings that were found in Oswald's perch. One of them was away from the other 2, and Howard Donahue explains the single one perfectly. It was dented and probably used as a chamber plug. That is to stop moisture and grit from getting into the chamber.
The dented casing was found several feet from the other 2 casings. Perhaps Oswald ejected this chamber plug before firing the first 2 shots from the window. So if the third and fatal headshot didn't come from Lee Harvey Oswald's rifle, where did it come from? The Warren Commission calculated that the headshot came down at a declination of just under 16 degrees.
The trajectory from the book depository was 16 degrees down and about 6 degrees right to left, based on the midline of the vehicle.
Bonar Menninger is a Kansas-based journalist who chronicled Howard Donahue's search to uncover what happened in Dallas.
Even if the entrance wound and Oswald's position lined up, that right-to-left trajectory would have suggested that the exit wound would have been somewhere in his left side of his face, maybe his forehead, his nose, and not the upper right portion of his skull.
Donahue decides to conduct his own trajectory tests. He uses the Warren Commission's autopsy exhibits to determine the bullet's entrance and exit points. He drills the exit hole and hopes to trace the line of trajectory back to its source. Donahue slides a dowel through the skull to line up the trajectory with the position of President Kennedy's head at the time of the third shot.
Howard couldn't believe it, that it was absolutely impossible for the trajectory from Oswald's sniper position to have caused the wound that Kennedy suffered in his head. Didn't make sense.
It looks like the Warren Commission's lone gunman theory is wrong. Seeking answers, Donahue meets pathologist Dr. Russell Fisher. Fisher has been appointed by the Attorney General to re-examine JFK's autopsy, and he reveals startling new information about the president's head wound.
Dr. Fisher told him that the entrance wound was mislocated.
It's much higher, maybe 4 inches in this area here, perhaps here. Higher.
Huh.
At the autopsy in Bethesda, it was down here by the occipital protuberance, which is that bony bump on the back of your skull, but in fact, Dr. Fisher's panel found that it was 4 inches higher. It's at an inch to the right of the midline.
A big difference.
Armed with this new information, Donahue can now trace back the trajectory of the fatal shot based on the entrance wound's correct location. What he discovers comes as a complete surprise. On his drawings, he traces that trajectory back. He's shocked to discover it goes over the left rear seat of the Secret Service agent's follow-up car, close behind the presidential limousine. Could the fatal shot have been fired by an agent? Donahue writes to the Secret Service and asks for the names of the agents who rode in the follow-up car, what weapons they carry, and what caliber those weapons are. The Secret Service replies that they do not disclose the types of weapons they use, other than that agents are issued .38 caliber revolvers. The letter adds that Secret Service agents fired no shots at the time of the assassination. But Colin McLaren discovers witnesses who contradict the Secret Service.
There is 10 witnesses that claim to have smelled gunpowder at the time of the shooting at street level.
Dallas patrolman Earl Brown is standing on a railway bridge, looking down at the motorcade as it races to Parkland Hospital.
I heard those shots and then I smelled this gunpowder. Oh, I'd say a couple minutes later or so.
Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell and his wife Elizabeth are sitting in a convertible 4 cars back from the presidential limousine.
I was acutely aware of an odor of gunpowder.
With the wind at 15 miles per hour from the southwest, that gunpowder couldn't have come from the 6th floor window, not with the wind blowing in Lee Harvey Oswald's face.
To Colin McLaren, the testimonies from witnesses who smelled gunpowder at street level are strong evidence of a second shooter. One of these witnesses was Senator Ralph Yarborough, riding with Vice President Lyndon Johnson in an open Lincoln, directly behind the Secret Service follow-up car.
I've hunted all my life, and I've handled all kinds of weapons in the Army. I knew they were rifle shots, and there were 3 of them. A second or 2 later, I smelled gunpowder. I always found that strange, because being familiar with firearms, I could never see how I could smell the powder from a rifle in that high building. You don't smell gunpowder unless it blows in your face.
If a second weapon was fired, whose was it? After the shooting, police gather several dozen witnesses, many claiming to have seen it.
The Dallas Sheriff's Office found the best type of witness, those that saw something on the day and were prepared to make statements before they could be corrupted from outside influences.
I heard at least 2 shots fired.
22-year-old Hugh Betzner is standing alongside the motorcade taking photographs.
I also saw a man in either the president's car or the car behind his pull out what looked like a rifle.
Hugh Betzner is just one of the people to see a gun at the scene. McLaren discovers that there are others. Senator Ralph Yarborough is in the motorcade. He also says that he saw a Secret Service agent pull out a rifle.
I heard 3 shots, no more. All seemed to come from the right rear. Some of the Secret Service men looked backward and to the right, in the general direction for where the explosion seemed to come from. The one Secret Service man sitting down in the car ahead of us pulled out an automatic weapon or rifle, and he looked backward.
Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell is traveling in a convertible 4 cars behind the presidential limousine.
We could tell, of course, that there was confusion in the presidential car. Activity. The Secret Service men ran to that car. From out of nowhere appeared one Secret Service man with a submachine gun. His attention seemed to be focused up toward the building.
Even Secret Service agent Winston Lawson testifies that he saw a fellow agent holding a rifle.
But I also noticed, right after the reports, an agent standing up with an automatic weapon in his hand. And the first thing that flashed through my mind was that he had fired, because this was the only weapon I'd seen up to that point.
Just one camera captures an agent inside the Secret Service follow-up car with an assault rifle in his hands. What Howard Donahue now suspects is that the second shooter has been hidden in plain sight all along. But who is the agent? And why would he shoot the president? Howard Donahue concluded that the Warren Commission's lone gunman theory was wrong. There had to be a second shooter in Dealey Plaza. His ballistic tests traced the kill shot back to the Secret Service car behind the presidential limousine. Colin McLaren also found several witnesses who smelt gunpowder at street level and saw an agent brandishing a rifle. In the days immediately after the assassination, the Secret Service agents are ordered to write statements about their actions that day, including George Hickey.
The last shot seemed to hit his head and cause noise at the point of impact, which made him fall forward and to his left again. At the end of the last shot, I reached to the bottom of the car and picked up the AR-15 rifle, cocked and loaded it, and stood partway up in the car and looked about. At this point, the cars were passing under the overpass.
George Hickey's version of what happened is interesting. He claims that he had hold of the AR-15 just as they were going underneath the underpass. Yet, you've got 11 different witnesses who gave testimony that say very clearly he had hold of the weapon at the time of the third shot. That is, of course, back on Dealey Plaza. Interestingly again is, of those 11, 7 of them are Secret Service agents.
Agent Winston Lawson rides in front of the president, in the lead car. He gives a sworn statement about what he saw.
I noticed Agent Hickey standing up in the follow-up car with the automatic weapon. I first thought he fired at someone.
Agent Roy Kellerman, in his Warren Commission testimony, confirms that weapon is in the motorcade.
We have an AR-15. It's out of its case. It won't be shown. It could be laying on the floor, but she is ready to go.
Ready to go means that the assault weapon is cocked, loaded, one up the spout, and safety on. In the case of George Hickey, all he would have had to have done was flip the safety, point and shoot.
But that's not what Agent Hickey claims in his written statement.
I reached to the bottom of the car and picked up the AR-15 rifle, cocked and loaded it, and stood partway up in the car and looked about.
Why did Hickey say he cocked and loaded the AR-15 when Kellerman testifies it was ready to go? Earl Warren confronts Secret Service Chief James Rowley about the use of assault rifles in the motorcade.
As you go along in the motorcade, you have men who are scanning the buildings along the route, don't you?
Yes, sir.
And they have submachine guns in one of their cars?
No.
Warren knows from other testimony that this is not true.
For security reasons, I'd like to...
Rowley evades the question.
We have no machine guns now.
So here we have a situation where the latest weapon in the Secret Service arsenal, the AR-15, is withdrawn immediately after.
To try to understand the Secret Service's actions, Colin McLaren retraces their steps leading up to the assassination.
The Secret Service agents put JFK to bed just after midnight, and then for some strange reason they went bar hopping, and they were seen to be in the company of scantily clad women, as the Warren Commission called it, strippers in other words. And the drinking went on till just after 5 a.m. before they went back to their rooms to prepare themselves for a 7 a.m. start.
Agent George Hickey, whose primary role was as a driver, was already in Dallas preparing the cars for the motorcade.
He in fact was gazetted or attached to the garage, that is to polish the cars, check the oil and water and prepare it for the president and the motorcade.
George Hickey was not in the bar getting drunk the night before.
And that had to have been the reason for George Hickey, who was at that stage just a driver, to have to step up, take the AR-15 and take the sniper role on the follow-up car, a set of responsibilities totally foreign to him.
Now McLaren examines the behaviour of the Secret Service at Parkland Hospital, directly after the shooting. The lead car, the President's limousine, and the Secret Service follow-up car arrive at Parkland at 12:36 p.m., 6 minutes after the 3 shots were fired. Senator Ralph Yarborough is among those in this bloody motorcade.
I walked up to the car where Mrs. Kennedy was still there on the back seat, lying there with her head bowed over, covering the husband's head, his blood running down her leg and on her clothes, and twice saying, "They've murdered my husband. They've murdered my husband." It's the most tragic sight of my life.
Texas law requires an autopsy to be performed before the body can be shipped out of the state. Dr. Earl Rose is the Dallas County Medical Examiner.
The body cannot leave this hospital until after an autopsy has been performed.
Now, this is the body of the President of the United States, and we're going to take it back to Washington.
You are not taking him anywhere. There's a law here, and we are going to enforce it. You cannot lose the chain of evidence.
My friend, that part of the law can be waived. Now, either you move, or we run it over you.
The Secret Service escorts the President's body from Parkland Hospital and loads the casket aboard Air Force One.
I was struck by the heavy-handed manner in which the Secret Service and the presidential aides removed the body from Dallas. Was it simply a panicked reaction to the chaos of the moment, Or was it more a deliberate attempt of a cover-up of what happened earlier that day in Dealey Plaza?
Air Force One touches down at Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington at 5:58 p.m. President Kennedy's body is driven to Bethesda Naval Hospital for the autopsy. Chief pathologist James Humes and his team know their efforts here tonight will be critical to any criminal proceeding against the crime's perpetrator. J. Edgar Hoover has sent FBI agents James Siebert and Francis O'Neill to stay with the body through to embalmment. He expects a detailed report on everything that happens in the autopsy room. Typically, a small pathology team are alone, but this is no ordinary autopsy.
Here we have an autopsy where there's at least 30 people inside the suite. Representatives of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the FBI, technicians, pathologists, all working in this massive crush to get the autopsy done, arguing, talking over each other. The head pathologist, Dr. Humes, even stated in evidence that he wished he could have chucked them all out.
Just stay back a little bit, please. It was like trying to do delicate neurosurgery in a three-ring circus.
30 years after the JFK assassination, the Clinton administration initiates the Assassination Records Review Board to release documents relating to the shooting and conduct interviews about JFK's autopsy. This gives Colin McLaren access to vital information that was classified during Howard Donohue's investigation in the 1970s.
In 1995, the ARRB subpoenaed all records to do with the Dallas trip from all agencies involved. They wanted to inspect all the books. Unfortunately, the Secret Service destroyed their documents, all their records, the week earlier. Of course, why would they do that?
Did the Secret Service have something to hide? From the outset, McLaren thinks basic forensic practices were being ignored. Secret Service agents' clothing is spattered with JFK's brain matter.
Their clothing should have been bagged up and treated as exhibits. They were witnesses. They should never have been there, yet they stayed for the duration.
Dr. Humes examines the president's head, recording a massive wound 130 millimeters in diameter. He concludes it is the result of a bullet that's exploded. X-ray technician Gerald Custer X-rays the president according to Dr. Humes' instructions.
Good. Clear.
When developed, these X-rays clearly show multiple bullet fragments in the skull. Later, Custer's boss, Dr. John Ebersole, approaches him.
He made it perfectly clear I was not to speak of this.
If you could, convey the sense of the words that he gave you as best as you can.
Keep your mouth shut.
Okay, that's perfectly blunt.
Forensic photographers take many photos, especially of JFK's head wound. Young photographer Floyd Reeby testifies to taking around 100 shots on 8 or 9 separate film rolls. They are crucial evidence.
When you finished with one roll of 35 millimeter film, what did you do with that?
Well, I took it out of the camera and gave it to one of the Secret Service agents there.
The FBI records show that 22 color rolls and 18 black and white rolls are taken. Their care is entrusted to the Secret Service agent, Roy Kellerman. Gerald Custer testifies that the autopsy room was a scene of loud debate and that he witnessed the doctors being harassed.
The commotion level was astronomical. The decibel level was extremely high. You had to scream at people at times. There was a 4-star general in there and a civilian who I took to be Kennedy's personal physician.
And were this general and this person in civilian clothing giving directions to Dr. Ebersole?
Correct, absolutely.
What kind of directions were they giving to him?
In a sense, the Kennedy family would not like you to pursue this path any further.
Would you like her to come in right now? Would you like...
Wait, this ain't...
still be here.
We've got the White House on our backs, doctor. What are we supposed to do? All right, you have 5 minutes.
Dr. Humes does complete the autopsy, but having had his work disrupted, he's dissatisfied with the result. The pathology slides created by Dr. Humes are handed to Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman.
If everything in the autopsy suite was on the up and up, you would have had a cause of death sorted out within about 3 or 4 hours. All the exhibits would have been bagged, labelled, and a proper continuity and signatures would have taken place. But unfortunately, none of that happened.
Shortly after the autopsy, Dr. Humes' boss, George Berkeley, informs him that Robert Kennedy wants his brother's brain.
He asked me would I give him the brain, which I promptly handed to him in a pail. Then the mystery really begins, because what happened after that, I don't know. What George Berkeley did with the brain is the mystery of the century. And why I so easily acceded to his wishes, I don't know. Other than he was talking about Bobby and the family and what they want.
Days after the autopsy, Dr. Ebersole returns from a meeting at the White House with the Secret Service. He has a strange request for Gerald Custer.
He gave me 3 or 4 different metal fragments varying in size, and he asked me to tape them to the bones.
And did you tape them to the bones?
Yes, sir.
Custer says he was asked to manufacture an X-ray that would obscure detection of an explosive frangible bullet by placing full metal jacket bullet fragments on JFK's remains.
Well, that was the most dramatic. After I signed the gag order, I was told that if anything, no matter what got out, it would be the sorriest day of my life, and I'd spend most of my time behind prison walls.
A few days later, the chief photographer and Floyd Reeby are approached by a Secret Service agent.
You mentioned something related to a secrecy oath.
Well, we were told that this was classified information under the National Security Act, and we had to read it and sign it. And if we talked about it to anybody at all, well, we'd be court-martialed.
Virtually everybody in that autopsy suite that day was forced to sign a gag order.
Is the Secret Service trying to cover up a complex conspiracy to kill the President of the United States? Ballistic expert Howard Donahue has a simple answer. As McLaren scours the Warren Commission report, he discovers that some vital witnesses from the autopsy were never called, and that, in his view, pivotal evidence was disregarded. Most crucially, the autopsy notes of FBI agents James Siebert and Francis O'Neill. McLaren discovers that Assistant Counsel Arlen Specter meets with the 2 agents and asks them if they'd made any notes in the autopsy suite. The agents said that they did. They also told him that Senior Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman took possession of all photographs and X-rays. He promised they would be made available to the FBI. Almost all of these X-rays and photographs are never seen again.
Did you see any FBI or Secret Service agents taking notes?
Oh, that's right. Siebert and O'Neill. I could swear they were writing a book that night, writing it down.
But Assistant Counsel Arlen Specter tells a different story.
In a memo written by Specter, he stated there was no notes made by Siebert and O'Neill. Was this a misunderstanding by Specter, or was it in fact a lie? Either way, Siebert and O'Neill weren't called to the Warren Commission or their notes. Why?
2 months into the Warren Commission hearings, X-ray technician Gerald Custer has a preliminary interview with Counsellor Specter outside the courtroom.
There's little doubt that Custer's observations in the autopsy and his story of falsifying an X-ray for the Secret Service would have been explosive evidence at the Warren Commission.
Custer tells Specter his story and waits to be summoned. Specter never calls him. Senator Ralph Yarborough is also keen to testify at the Warren Commission. He was in the car behind Secret Service agent George Hickey.
One Secret Service man sitting down in the car ahead of us pulled out an automatic weapon or rifle, and he looked backward. I smelled gunpowder. It clung to the car nearly all the way to the hospital.
Chief Justice Warren demanded that Yarborough be called to testify. He never did.
Why Warren's order was not obeyed is a mystery. Although he was the head of the inquiry, McLaren believes he was not always in control. For whatever reason, the commission did not interview key eyewitnesses,
It's not known whether Arlen Spector spoke to any of the agents from the follow-up car. Only one of those agents in the car gave evidence to the Warren Commission. Depending on your point of view, that is either very neglectful or very telling. I came to believe that the Warren Commission themselves weren't interested in finding the truth.
For Howard Donahue and Colin McLaren, the overwhelming evidence of their investigation reveals what they think is the truth behind the assassination of JFK. Three shots are fired. The first is by Lee Harvey Oswald. It misses, but a ricocheting fragment of the bullet hits the president, causing him to say, "My God, I'm hit." At the sound of gunfire, Agent George Hickey turns to look up at the 6th floor window. Oswald fires again. The second bullet enters the president's back and exits his neck, hurtling forward into Governor Connolly's back and exiting through his chest. Hickey picks up the AR-15 to return fire, flicks off the safety, and as the follow-up car lunges forward, he pulls the trigger. The presidential car is rushed to Parkland Hospital, where, McLaren believes, a massive cover-up begins. Both Donahue and McLaren find that 11 people are able to put the assault rifle in George Hickey's hands at or before the time of the third shot. 7 of the 11 are Hickey's fellow Secret Service agents. McLaren and Donahue also identified 10 people who testified that they smelled gunpowder at street level at or around the time of the shooting.
You don't smell gunpowder unless it blows in your face.
The autopsy in Bethesda, Maryland is also suspicious to McLaren. The Secret Service's interference, the falsified X-rays, the lost photographs, and the missing brain of the president all suggest a conspiracy.
We talked about it to anybody at all, well, we'd be court-martialed.
Finally, there is the Warren Commission itself, with its unsummoned witnesses, unheard testimony, unanswered questions, and unpresented evidence. Colin McLaren believes the Warren Commission had their shooter conveniently dead. They had their murder weapon. They had a plausible forensic account of a 3-bullet assassination. Case closed. McLaren believes that the US government was covering up Secret Service agent George Hickey's fatal shot. But why did Hickey shoot the President of the United States? Both Donahue and McLaren agree the third shot that hit Kennedy was the result of a tragic accident.
Agent Hickey reached down on the seat beside him, grabbed the AR-15, bring it to his shoulder. He flipped off the safety, and at that time he fell over backwards and the gun went off, striking President Kennedy in the back of the head.
What Howard proved, in my view, was that Oswald didn't fire that shot, and most likely it was fired by Agent George Hickey from the follow-up car accidentally. In the panic of the moment, you know, in the chaos of combat, he's trying to respond, he's trying to do his job. He's probably already acquired Oswald visually, going to return fire, and fate intervenes.
George Hickey never takes the stand to be cross-examined about his statement. He never speaks publicly about the assassination. He dies in 2005.
Understanding the real cause of the death of JFK isn't about blackening the name of any individual or organisation. It's about the truth and supplying a definitive answer to the American people. An answer no more complex than a tragic accident colliding with a foolhardy assassination attempt. Maybe it's time to quietly close the door behind history's most talked about and debated crime scene.
After the break, there's more heartache for America's most famous family. Brand new JFK Jr., The Flight That Killed a Kennedy, is next.